Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of Military Spouse to Millionaire. Today, we are going to be talking about being a landlord versus accidentally becoming a slumlord. And what I mean by that is having rental properties, having investments, having things that give you passive income every month is obviously something that I'm a huge proponent of. However, it does come with a degree of risk. It comes with a degree of preparedness. You should definitely know what you're getting into when you go into being a landlord, not just a property owner for a home that you're going to be living in. And especially here in Hawaii, there are a lot of tax liabilities and different things that are not common to mainland property ownership and being a landlord, and just the cost. I mean, as someone who owns a rental property here in Hawaii and owns several on the mainland, I can tell you the risk of vacancies being more of a financial burden are higher here in Hawaii versus, say, my property in Colorado. And what I mean by that is, perfect example, we just went through in the last 4 or 5 months, we had a vacancy in one of our Colorado properties, and we had a vacancy here in our Hawaii property. And let me tell you, the $800 a month vacancy in my Colorado property was far easier to stomach and digest and manage versus the $3,000 a month cost of owning my rental here in Hawaii. So we had a 1 month vacancy at our property here in Hawaii, and we had a 2 month vacancy in our property in Colorado. However, our vacancy for our Colorado property ended up being, $1,600 out of pocket, where our vacancy here in Hawaii just for 1 month was $3,000 with the mortgage and the maintenance fees. So that is definitely something to consider. And those things kind of all happened around the same time. And then I just went to some listing appointments, probably 3 listing appointments last weekend. And for a few of them, my clients were asking me, like, hey, what does it look like selling versus renting? And that's honestly one of my favorite things to do, is to sit down with people and really crunch the numbers, right? Like, if it makes sense on paper and you want to keep your house here, let's talk about it, especially for all of my clients who really have that sweet COVID rate, those 2%, the 3%. A lot of those people are looking to potentially keep their homes because they have such good interest rates. And those are a demographic of people that are getting very close to it being extremely feasible. However, they're still running at a deficit. So I thought having some actual good real world examples for this topic would be immensely helpful. So, whenever I go to these appointments, I always ask my clients for a copy of their mortgage statement, which is this. And then I run them a net sheet from the title company. And then we sort of break down, just beer math style, what the cost would be if they kept it as a rental versus if they sold it and got the tax-free profit. So I have 2 examples. I have a single family home and I have a townhouse. Let's start with the townhouse. The owner of the townhouse, their mortgage is $2,485 a month. The maintenance and association fees for the townhouse are $580 a month. So their total expense for this house is $3,065 a month. Looking at rents in the area, I projected that they could rent the property for $2,800 a month. They have to pay a 10% property management fee. If you own a property here in Hawaii and you are not on island, you do have to have a property manager manage that property. Industry standard for that is roughly 10%. You can find people maybe give you a deal, past client, do it for a little bit less. You're still looking likely 8 or 9%, but going off of industry standards, it is 10%, which is $280 a month. This is of the rent amount. And then here in Hawaii, the taxes, you guys, the taxes on properties here for rentals, they will really add up and sneak up on you. So you have to pay something called general excise tax. I pay it on my rental. I pay it on the commission that I make. Every dollar that gets made in Hawaii is taxed general excise tax, and that is 4.5% of the rent amount. So that's another $126. So just the property management fee and the general excise tax comes to about $406 a month that they're paying. And we're already not able to rent out the property for what their monthly obligations are. But even if you wanted to really like hypothesize and say, okay, what if we could rent it out for $3,065? Even if you can rent out your property and break even in that way, they're still going to be at a deficit of $406 a month. But if I'm correct and they can only rent it out for $2,800, they're at a deficit of $671 a month, every single month, just to keep this property. And depending on what your goals are for the home, that might be okay. If you have the money in your budget to cover that $671 a month deficit, it's not the end of the world, because at the end of the day, you are still putting it towards an investment. It is still going to keep an appreciating asset that gains value at roughly, 5% a year over year for the last 38 years. That is roughly the statistic. So an argument could definitely be made that, sure, you're at a deficit, but, over time, rents go up. I've talked about in previous podcasts, Clayton and I have owned properties, and for the first, year, 2 years, 3 years, we ran at a deficit. Not a deficit of $671. I was talking like $150 deficit. And then over the years, rents went up, and now we're at a point where we're cash flowing on those properties. So if you really are in it for a long-term investment, like we've owned some of our rental properties for 13 years, if you're in it for a long-term investment, this could come round to eventually breaking even, eventually cash flowing. It will take time, and it will take, just knowing that you have the budget to cover that deficit every single month, knowing that it's still an investment. However, the big if comes in when we talk about how long are you going to own this property, because you have to factor in, well, how long are you going to own the property? Are you still going to be active duty military? Those are things to consider. And I will give a disclaimer here that I am not a tax professional, because there are going to be some tax related things that I mentioned in this episode. You want to talk to a tax professional about all of these things if they're applicable to you. I want to put them on your radar because they are things that are very specific to Hawaii that people don't even know about. I had a call yesterday with a referral who was calling me for property management. And at the end of the call, he was like, oh my God, I knew like 1% of the things that you just told me in this call. And it was only like a 25-minute call. People just have a real lack of education and information on specifically Hawaii and what it's like to be a landlord here and the potential tax implications. So always talk to a tax professional about capital gains. They did recently change the capital gains rule for active duty military. It used to be that if you owned and lived in a property as your primary home for 2 out of the last 5 years, that you did not have to pay capital gains tax. They recently changed that to 2 out of the last 10 years if you're active duty military. The guy I was talking to yesterday has 14 years in service. He has lived in this home for at least 2 years, but he's getting out in 6 years. So I then don't know, and told him to talk to a tax professional. If you get out of the military, is it still 2 of the last 10 years because you owned the home or bought the home during your military service? That's a little bit of a gray area that I'm unsure about. But say you do keep this house long-term. Say this is a long-term investment like our properties. We've owned some for 13 years. Say you own this property for 13 years and you go to sell it, and you want the money to be liquid money that you can do whatever you want with. You don't want to do a 1031 exchange. I'll talk about that in a second. Say you want the liquid cash. If you've owned the property for 13 years, hell, maybe you're even cash flowing on it at that time because, rents have gone up. That's fantastic. But if you've kept it for that long, you're then going to be subject to capital gains, and you're also going to be subject to something called HARPTA, which is the Hawaii Real Property Tax Act, and it's a withholding of 7.25% of the sales price of the home, not of your profit. And this is designed for foreign investors, anybody that's not a Hawaii resident. 7.25% of the sales price is going to be withheld to the state of Hawaii at the end of the tax year. You can file to get a portion of that back. I do not know what that looks like because that's how infrequent it is that people that I work with that are military families choose to keep their rentals and choose to keep them that long term that it's ever been something that I've seen a client have to go through. But you can bet your bottom dollar, even if you get something back, Hawaii is going to get theirs. They have that tax for a reason. Hawaii is going to get their piece of that pie via that Hawaii Real Property Tax Act. 7.25% is what they're going to withhold of the sales price of the home. And then you have to go through that process at the end of the year to file and get whatever it is back. So when you're thinking of, oh, I'm going to keep this property for 13 years and all this good appreciation, you need to factor in those types of things. You need to factor in over 13 years, how much money are you spending on a property manager? How much money are you spending in general excise tax? How much money are you spending in capital gains, in paying HARPTA? How much money are you giving away in taxes now and in the future? For the gentleman that I was speaking to yesterday, we did the math, and over the course of a year, he was giving away thousands and thousands of dollars. Over the course of 5 years, it ended up being like $40,000 that he was giving away via like all these different things. And then when he sells, what does that look like? So it's not as cut and dry here. You don't often cash flow right away. And that's just one piece of the puzzle. Something else that I want to bring up, and this kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier with my properties and vacancies. If this home had a 2-month vacancy, it would cost my clients $6,130 to keep this property going, paid for, good to go. Not a lot of military families. I'm not going to say no military families because general broad statements like that are most of the time inappropriate to make, but not a lot of my military families that I work with are comfortable with the possibility of, hey, I need to have, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 just lying around in case this property is vacant, in case we can't find renters. Because guess what, guys? Interest rates are going down, which means more people are going to be jumping back into the market as buyers, which will hurt the rental market, which means, there have been millions of people sitting on the sidelines waiting for interest rates to go down. Now that they have started to go down, we are going to see a shift in more people buying, less people renting. And that means rents are not maybe going to go up as much. So there's all these components that you need to think about and be educated on and discuss amongst yourselves. If my clients sold the home, they'd be making $64,400 and they would be making that profit tax free. And they're able to take that liquid cash and go on to whatever adventure they have next in life. As an example, this is a really good example. I had a client just recently, maybe 2 Mondays ago, close on their house. They made roughly the same profit. I think it was like $58,000, $59,000. They're back on the mainland already. They have their entire VA entitlement freed up. They're not only buying a new primary residence for them using the VA loan and zero money down, they're also purchasing 2 investment properties. And I didn't get in the weeds with them over like, how much money are you going to cash flow and blah, blah, blah. Like I did not have that conversation, but I'm betting you dollars to donuts, just knowing mainland real estate and where they are in the US, they're probably going to at least break even, if not cash flow a little bit right away. And they now have a new primary residence and 2 investment properties with the liquid cash that they made from owning a home here. My normal wisdom, like my conventional wisdom to people, is take your money and run. That is most often what I tell people. The appreciation game here in Hawaii is fantastic, but getting the opportunity to also make all of this money tax-free is substantial when you start factoring in property management fees, general excise tax, Hawaii real property tax, all of those things, capital gains down the road if it applies. It eats away at the profit, and you need to make sure that you have literally thousands of dollars in reserve in case you have a vacancy, in case something breaks, in case something goes wrong. What if a renter damages your property? I've had damage done to a property to the tune of about $6,000. Their $1,100 deposit didn't go very far to fixing my property that they damaged. And if you don't have that money, if you don't have that reserve, that's when you enter slumlord territory, because your property, if you can't afford to maintenance it, is going to fall into disrepair. And then you're renting out properties that you're not renting out for as much. Your asset is not taken care of. You're not getting the same sort of appreciation. And then the whole investment that you've made is a depreciating asset because you didn't have the financial preparedness to take care of that. I personally, especially for beginning investors, and even now, like I only own one property here in Hawaii, guys. I have 9 total. 8 of them are on the mainland. I only have one here that I got as a foreclosure, and it was so cheap that I just couldn't say no to it. But largely speaking, we invest on the mainland because the risk is just less. Again, because I can stomach an $800 or $1,000 or $1,100 mortgage if I have a vacancy, or if I have multiple vacancies, because the more rental properties you get, the more exposure, the more risk you have. What if we have 3 rental properties that are all vacant and they're all here in Hawaii and they all have $3,000 a month mortgages? That's not a great feeling. I don't care what tax bracket you're in, how much money you make. Like, it's not a good feeling to think about, like, oh my gosh, I could have $9,000 or $10,000 a month in mortgages and maintenance fees that I'm responsible for. So not only is the tax liability less on the mainland, but it's just more digestible to pay those mortgages if something goes wrong, like God forbid, knock on wood, than it is here in Hawaii, in my opinion. And I think that the cash people make here in Hawaii from selling after only 3 years, and mind you, both of these clients only have owned for 3 years. When they get ready to sell, they'll own for just about 3 years, not over 3 years. That's one example. Let's go on and talk about the single family home, because this is, even more substantial, because obviously single family homes, like our median single family home price is over 1.1 million. This property has a mortgage of $3,683. The maintenance fee is $434. Yes, here in Hawaii, even single family homes a lot of times have maintenance fees. Total expense to maintain this home, pause for a drink. And no, for all of you who are following my journey this year, I did not cave in October and break down and have a cocktail. I do enjoy drinking my mocktails just out of a wine glass. I just like to feel fancy. This is actually one of those adaptogenic, like beverages. It's called Recess Mood. Not paying me for advertising, but I got a few different flavors. This is the peach one, and honestly, so pleasantly surprised. Sometimes I put other like juices in it. I put like cranberry juice or cherry juice if I want it to like look like wine. But for those of you who don't know, I gave up drinking this year, so I am on a mocktail journey, just a little parched, so stand by. Okay, back at it. The total expenses for this home, $4,117. The rental analysis pulled up that we could rent this property for roughly $3,800. The property management fee would be $380, and the general excise tax would be $171. So just in property management fee and general excise tax, we're looking at $551 just for those 2 things. This family would be running at a deficit of $868 a month, which is crazy. Like, that's 2 car payments. I can't even tell you like what you could cover in your life for $868 a month is substantial. Their profit from selling would be $58,300. If they had a vacancy for 2 months, they would need $8,234 to cover a 2-month vacancy. And I keep using 2-month vacancy because I literally just had one. So it's like fresh in my mind that is a very real possibility. Or they could take their $58,000. They could go on to do, whatever it is in life that they want to do with that tax-free money and not have to worry about such heavy liability. I mentioned earlier a 1031 exchange. For those of you who don't know what that is, a 1031 exchange is basically when you sell an investment property to buy another investment property or properties. We have some very, very good friends of ours. Crazy story. They bought a house in Kailua like 20 years ago for $800,000 or something ridiculous. It was less than $1 million, which is crazy. If you know Kailua, if you know the island at all, the east side, Kaneohe, Kailua, is the most expensive part of the island. It's absolutely gorgeous, but absolutely crazy expensive over there. They bought a house 20 years ago for $800,000. They sold it maybe 3 years ago for over $2 million. Mind-blowing. The profit, mind-blowing. They did not want to pay taxes on all that profit, obviously. So they did a 1031 exchange, and the husband's family is almost all in Kentucky, and they've been buying up properties there left and right. With the one property that they sold, they did a 1031 exchange, and no joke, bought like 10 properties in Kentucky with the profit that they made from selling the one house here. So if that is something that you would want to do, is not have the liquid cash to spend however you want. If you're okay with being kind of forced to invest the profit into other properties, that is a time where I say, okay, if you're not running at a large deficit, or if you're comfortable with the deficit and you want to keep the property here for a certain amount of time and do a 1031 exchange to kick that can down the road, because let me be clear, you will still have to pay taxes. There is no avoiding the taxes. Death and taxes are the only two guarantees in life. You will still have to pay them. The reason people do 1031 exchanges, Clayton and I have done one in the past, I would do one again in a heartbeat, is because we are in a very high tax bracket, and I do not want to pay taxes at this tax bracket. I want to wait until Clayton turns 50 and we don't work for a year because we're going on a 9-month cruise for his 50th birthday. And at the end of that year, when I've made substantially less money, that's when I want to sell assets and pay any potential taxes, because I'll be in a much lower tax bracket. But if you think that you're in a high tax bracket and there'll come a time in life when you're in a much lower tax bracket, that could be a strategy. And again, all things to like talk about, to be educated on. But at the end of the day, what's your plan? What do you think for the future, your situation's going to be, which I know can be difficult because, who knows in 10 years, for certain anything. But that is one strategy. The other thing to know, or I guess to think about when you're talking about maybe keeping a property here, is, are you ever going to come back to Hawaii? Are you ever going to come back here and potentially live in the property again as your primary home? When I was talking to the guy yesterday, he has a 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhouse, which maybe is probably 900 square feet. It's nice. It's in a good neighborhood. But he literally, during our conversation, is like, hey, we're going on to our next duty station. We're starting a family, et cetera, et cetera. We love it here. We would absolutely think about coming back here. But as we're talking, it kind of got brought up like, oh, well, if we're starting a family and I want 2 or 3 kids and we come back here, are we really going to want to go back to living in a 2-bedroom, 900 square foot townhouse? And the answer ultimately for him, I think, as we talked it out, came to no. So even if he came back here, he wouldn't want to live in the house again, which then still circles back around to, okay, then, you're going to have to maybe look at HARPTA. You're going to have to look at capital gains. You're going to be running at a, several $100 a month deficit in between now and then. And he's going to call me back after he talks to his wife. But I think at the end of the call, he was, he got on the call like, I want to rent. He got off the call like, okay, we need to have some bigger discussions and figure out what our plan is, which is all I ask everyone to do, is reach out to me. Let's have the conversations. Let's war game a few different scenarios. Let's talk about what these deficits look like versus what the profit looks like, and what you could do with that profit going on to the mainland. Like this guy I talked to yesterday, you guys, he's going to Fort Polk. He's going to Louisiana. I promise you, he is probably going to make close to 6 figures just talking to him on the phone and doing like the beer math on his profit. I would not be surprised if he made $90,000 to $100,000 selling his home. And that would go a really long way in Louisiana towards getting him, a new primary home or getting a few investment properties versus keeping a home here and running at a deficit. So, this was a really, really dense episode. I know there was a lot of numbers, there's a lot of different scenarios, there's a lot of hypotheticals that are out there, but episodes like this are definitely designed to prompt you guys to get a hold of me so we can have the educated discussion, so I can look at your numbers specifically, your plans specifically, your future goals and aspirations, not just for your property, but financially. All of those discussions I love having with people. It's not one size fits all. It's not sell the house, rent the house. It's black and white. There are so many variables. So let's talk about them. That's all I have for you today. Thanks so much. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe. As always, I would be nothing without all of you. Thanks, guys. Bye.